Thank you. Professor Atkins, will you present your first rebuttal, please?
I'd like to perhaps paraphrase a remark by the economist J.K. Galbraith, who said that astrology was invented in order to make economic forecasting look respectable. I'd like to say that theology was invented to make philosophy look respectable. You've heard nothing but obfuscation. Let me remind you, because I have to, my first rebuttal refers to the first 20 minutes of Dr. Craig's presentation, rather than his immediate one. The level of argument that we heard relating to the eternal nature of the universe. It was that planets clearly have not been going round the sun an infinite number of times. I shorten the rather ludicrous argument that we actually heard. No one ever says that. He's raised a straw man. What we're really concerned about is whether the universe itself is infinite. And we can measure the life of the solar system as about 5 billion years. We can measure the life of the universe as 13.7 billion years. We weren't talking about that at all. We were talking about whether the sequence of universes might be infinite and that there was never actually a beginning. You cannot argue against that by philosophy. You cannot argue against that by theology. The only way you can argue about it is by looking at the evidence, and we heard no evidence whatsoever. And arguments about infinity are always extraordinarily doubtful. I mean, Professor Craig said that an infinite number of events has never occurred in the universe. I refer him to Zeno, halving the distance again, never getting anywhere. But clearly, if you've got an infinite number of halving of the distances, you get anywhere you want to do. So never listen to an argument about infinity. It's infinitely slippery. The travesty of my remarks about nothing coming from nothing. Let me take that as an example. What I wanted to show is that science is circumspect in the way that it approaches the great questions of being. Okay, it looks around, and if you're a naive looker arounder, a philosopher, a theologian, a gardener, a farmer, you will see a huge amount of energy in the universe, and you will marvel at God's bounty. But then, as a scientist, you think again, and you say, yes, I can measure the amount of energy in the universe. I won't just lie back and think about it. I will measure it, because once I put numbers to ideas, they become testable and verifiable. And to determine the energy of the universe, the first thing I do is to weigh it. So I weigh the mass, I determine the mass of a galaxy, and then I multiply it by the square of the speed of light. And through E equals mc squared, I get the energy that that galaxy represents. I do it for this galaxy, that galaxy, this galaxy, every galaxy in the universe, not just the ones we can see. And I get a colossal value, and I lie back and wonder at God's munificence. And then I say, but I've forgotten something, which is the gravitational attraction between galaxies. And whenever you have two attracting bodies, they lower their energy. And if you take the gravitational attraction of this galaxy with that one, it lowers that first sum we got a little bit. Then this galaxy with that one, this galaxy with that one, this galaxy with that one. And the signs are, and we're not completely certain about this, because we do not jump to conclusions in science. We are circumspect, imaginative, and honest. We find that that gravitational attraction reduces that original huge energy we had to zero. In other words, God's munificence was zero. And you don't need a God if the God isn't going to give you anything. What science does is to simplify the questions that need to be answered. It doesn't say, There was nothing originally, there's nothing now. What it does is to simplify the question that needs to be asked. We're moving cautiously, imaginatively, and reliably to understanding the incipience of the universe by identifying what questions truly have to be answered. There is nothing here, I will concede that, but it's an extremely interesting form of nothing. There was nothing originally. There is nothing here now, but it's through whatever event took place at the inception of the universe, it became an interesting form of nothing, which seems to be something. It may be metaphysical, and it may sound stupid, but what I'm doing is identifying the question that needs to be answered, not just sitting back in awe and saying, look at the universe, fantastic job, it obviously needed someone really rather special to do it. The resurrection, if I can jump forward, I do notice that Professor Craig, although I made 6 points, did not deal with all 6. Perhaps I should deal with all 3 of his. His second, of course, was the objectivity of moral values. To say that you cannot be moral without a God is frankly disgusting. I am moral. I do not believe that I am guided by a God, and I think it casts a slur on atheists everywhere in the world to presume that they are evil because they believe there is no God. Morals, as I asserted in my opening presentation, the emergence of morals should be understood. They should not simply be accepted. You should try to find the roots of moral behavior, hard as it is to trace the emergence of moral thinking as one's own body begins at 1 cell and turns into 1 trillion cells as evolution proceeds through billions of years, as people begin to think about the consequences of their actions. That's the way to understand morality, not just to lie back and think that there is an umpire in the sky somewhere. Try to understand. All I'm saying is that it is healthier to understand. If Voltaire said in one of my favorite quotations that people who believe in absurdities commit atrocities. And I think we see that in religious belief, where atrocities are affected in the name of dogma. The resurrection, I must deal with that in miracles. Of course, David Hume got it right when he said that there's always more reason to disbelieve the report than there is to believe what is reported. Look at the Gospels. You can't really believe it. Pretend we were writing about events 60 years ago when there was no actual real record. We wouldn't get it right. We'd make up a lot of it. The Gospels are political propaganda sheets, and it's inevitable and understandable that they were invented to make the point that they were trying to make. Yes, Joshua, if he existed, Jesus, I suppose you might call him, and I can well believe that in the Palestine of 2,000 years ago, there were lots of Joshuas around, that was probably a very nice man, and was certainly written up to be a very nice man by the people compiling the Gospels to establish the creed that they wanted to. But the actual evidence is extremely slender. The evidence in favor of an actual resurrection is compiled by those who start from a prejudicial point of view that it did occur and then seek to justify it. Others, those who deny the resurrection, say, This is such an extraordinary event. We need real extraordinary evidence to support it. And there is no real extraordinary evidence to support it. So why should you believe it? Because you can see that it was invented as a political manifesto? No, you cannot possibly believe it. And all this gibberish about having to justify atheism, I mean, that's another example of false premise. If I come into a room and say, I don't understand anything, I will start from the simplest explanation, and I will let you convince me that my simple explanation is inadequate. And if I can show that my explanation is inadequate, then I might begin to believe that perhaps there is indeed a God. But to say that it is my duty to dismantle someone else's belief is an incorrect and illogical approach to the particular question. I come into a room with, if you like, a barren view of the nature of the universe. And I ask you, Professor Craig, to convince me that my view is inadequate. That you have not done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Craig, now for the second round of rebuttals. Thank you.
Let's review those three arguments that I presented on behalf of theism in light of Professor Dawkins' critique. First, the cosmological argument. I presented philosophical and scientific evidence in support of the premise that the universe began to exist. In his last speech, I understood Professor Dawkins simply to assert that the arguments against an infinite regress are no good, but I heard no refutation of my examples that I gave to illustrate this, nor any reason as to why the reasoning was invalid. It needs to be understood here that the mathematical existence of the infinite is not in question. I'm talking about whether or not an actually infinite number of things can exist in reality. In their textbook, Mathematics and the Imagination, Edward Kastner and James Newman comment with regard to the infinite, its existence in any form is a matter of considerable doubt. The infinite certainly does not exist in the same sense that we say there are fish in the sea. Existence in the mathematical sense is wholly different from the existence of objects in the physical world. And I'm arguing that it's absurd metaphysically for there to be an actually infinite number of real objects, and I don't think Professor Atkins has dealt with my arguments. Secondly, with respect to the evidence for the beginning of the universe, again, he asserted there's no evidence scientifically for the beginning, but I presented the evidence in my opening speech. The Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, which is independent of any physical description of the early universe, requires a past space-time boundary. Here's what Alex Vilenkin himself says in his book, Many Worlds in One. He says, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." Now, Dr. Atkins is a reasonable man, and therefore he should be convinced by the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem and face this problem of a cosmic beginning. And in fact, as I say in his book, he does so. He argues that the way you get around the problem is by saying that nothing exists, that there was nothing then and there is nothing now, but I didn't hear a response to my refutation of that the argument for that based on positive and negative energy is misguided, and secondly, that the conclusion is absurd because it's self-contradictory and also because his own existence, at least, is undeniable. So it seems to me that we have good grounds for thinking the universe has a cause which is beginningless, uncaused, changeless, timeless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.